It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the tie. I will not go into more details about my clothing today. Thank you very much, Kio, for this beautiful picture, which reminds us that we move a little bit from the heart to the kidney, and does it make sense? The first slide is something to apologize for. Actually, I borrowed it from, I took it from Greg Stoll, actually, and I told him about it. And he showed this exactly in Chicago 5 years ago when he was somehow telling the audience at TVT, you know, I'm slow in enrolling into COAPT. And he said, you know, it's essential, but it's complex. And I think gathering evidence how to prevent contrast-induced acute kidney injury, CAKI, is also quite complex. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So within AQ, you could think about it. And I don't know how many of you know what happens in the movie with Tom Hanks and Madonna in the next 10 seconds. It's like this, yeah? There is no crying in baseball, there's no crying in CAKI. And so the background about the story is that there is definitely a need to address contrast-induced acute kidney injury. Far beyond, we heard today that everybody marks AKI for reimbursement reason. I'm talking about a total different story. I'm talking about contrast-induced acute kidney injury, and we all know that it is associated with mortality, and it adds up to CKD mortality. So on the right-hand side, you see if somebody with a GFR between 30 and 60 gets into AKI, his survival rate is as bad as being very, very close to hemodialysis, which is super bad. When you look on your ward, CAKI ranks second or third of all causes of acute kidney injury. And this led to the point, without any question, that in general practice, we use inappropriately low rates for coronary angiograms in these patients with CKD. So Glenn Sherritt, really a giant of nephrology, some 20 years ago coined the term renalism, which is still there today. There was a recent meta-analysis of about 150,000 patients with CKD, again showing that when you have a non-STEMI ACS and chronic kidney disease, not receiving a coronary angiogram doubles your risk of being dead, which is really, really substantial. So against this background, we had this idea and we had this retrospective data showing that if you put an impeller in a really high-risk protected PCI setting, that you really reduce the observed rate of acute kidney injury compared to the predicted rate of acute kidney injury, no matter in which scenario you look. Let's say you cut it by at least by half, right? So, and if you think at your students, at your very brave student, they will say, yeah, but are we not lacking a prospective trials? Why don't you randomize? Do you have any mechanistic idea? Well, and did you really use saline administration beforehand? Because I've read in my textbook that this is the only thing that protects your kidneys. And so far, to most of these things, we had to say, no, how should I do this? And so this was the reason why we started off with this trial in order to investigate the role of impeller to maintain kidney function in a high-risk cohort for contrast-induced acute kidney injury. We took the scenario of high-risk PCI, and we had the idea that in general practice we rather are a little bit blind as an interventionalist to look on the coronaries only. And we say, no, we use the Maron score, the projected score of getting acute kidney injury after contrast administration, to say not only he's at high risk for contrast, but he may only be a somewhat guy of high risk PCI, so we will be in the IFU. We said, okay, we want to check a little bit what's going on in the kidneys, and we will perform some kind of additional MRI. And we want to have, in the end, an adequate powered trial. So we thought, okay, we may need 200 patients. But of course, you want to go forever until you're 200 patients if you do harm. So we said, okay, we start with a low number to say where are we heading. And these are the data I'm going to share you today. So it works like this. When somebody is referred for very, very probable intervention, we check the Maron score, and if it's above 10, we ask the patient, well, can we put an impeller in when you're on the catheter? If he says yes, he will either receive saline only in the control group or saline only and an impeller. before the first ml contrast hits the patient. So we have these two groups. And to get an idea what's going on there, we will perform an after volume. We'll put them in the MRI scanner before and after the coronary angiogram in order to get an idea what's happening to the kidneys. Okay, so the results of the first 30 patients are like this. This is another picture of a Tom Hanks movie. And you can think that you will not work forever and you will not start your work where you can see there in the bag without looking. So we said, okay, after 30 patients, we want to know, since we're doctors, is there anything we do harm to our patients? Do we see peripheral problems? We can't do this. It's a highly elective setting, right? We want to see, is there any meaning of that we diminish the risk of acute kidney injury? And yeah, of course, we want to see into scalability. We want to see how many sites do we need if everything goes right before we put more people on the path, right? And I hope that I can convince you to say, okay, I want to take part in the trial after the after the first 30 patients. So here are the results. We have quite a high Maran score of about 13, indicating we should run about a risk of 35% getting acute kidney injury, or 30%. They're quite old, actually, right? Far beyond 70 years. We said we won't do it above 85. Turns out that a lot of people come in and are 86, and we say, oh, sorry, you can't take part in the trial. Lots of them are on anticoagulation. So I was worried if we get problems. If you check how comorbid, how frail they are, or how comorbid, if you are familiar with the Charlson Comorbidity Index, well, the chance of them without the cardiology picture of being there, still there in 10 years is around 15%. So these are really, really sick patients, right? Looking at least a little bit on the heart, you would say, yeah, it is not the typical high-risk PCI population. EF is much better than in all the trials. No matter that, the NT-proBNP is quite high, right? We don't have a super high class or complex scenario of intervention about one stent. We have a predefined idea how to administer the contrast, how to perform with the diagnostic angiogram. So we may have a little bit more contrast in the groups than if you would just say, let's think about every ml you're spending, but this is a trial. And these are the rough data we have in terms of pilot. If we just count ACAN bigger than 1, so creatinine rise of 0.3 or more, we would say, wow, in the control arm, it runs about 43%. I told you expected it around 30. In the Peller arm, we are about 20, so lower as expected. Of course, not significant. We didn't expect it to be significant. I told you we need at least 200 patients. Then I thought, okay, is there anything else I could say? Could I say that a fraction of patients may not have any problem with the contrast? So is there an amount of patients that were unchanged? And I said, okay, how many people have a creatinine rise or fall below 0.0? I would say this is just nothing, right? And there you could say, wow, only 14% in the control group do not go up at all with the creatinine. And in the impeller group, it's 60%. So there we at least have a sign, I would say. So if we scale the trial up, you would say, okay, if we are at 100 patients, we are at 0.04, which is, I wouldn't dare to do that, but we may be cool at 200, right? If you think about the mechanisms we are in, this is the slide where my initial slide on how to say sorry that I have no more data is devoted to, because nephrologists have 100 ideas how cardiorenal syndrome may interact. And so if you compare our patients for acute kidney injury and no acute kidney injury, red and blue, you would say, okay, of course, older patients have more acute kidney injury, Maran score higher, yeah, they score what it is for. The NT-proBNP has some ideas, contrast amount a little bit, left main stenting, crazy. So there you could get at least an idea of, well, maybe you have a problem with the LV-EDP, what is in the pathomechanisms of how cardiorenal syndrome, at least type 1, may work. Diastolic pressures, crazy idea. So if you look at the unloading, we were forcing ourselves to get an LV-EDP at the beginning, at the end. And at least you can see on the small numbers that having an impeller on during the intervention somehow diminishes, or at least abolishes in our few patients, the rise in LVEDP. This is, of course, after the impeller has been taken out at the end of the procedure without an impeller. But still, people in the control group have higher increments in LVEDP, which may be cool. The other thing nephrologists love to listen and to learn about is the renal resistance index. So in easy terms, if you have good diastolic perfusion of your kidney, it's always cool. In the morning we heard about pulsatility index, yeah, but also diastolic perfusion of your kidney is just really, really nice. You can see it in the blue picture above. And to make a long story short, if you have an impeller in and you check once in a while your blood pressures, the pressure drop on diastolic during diastole is 0. Yeah, and it's at least a little bit substantial in patients who are not on impeller, so you could at least guess that you have better diastolic perfusion in this group. So when we measure oxygenation in the medulla by MR, pre and post contrast, I have to come back to what Bill O'Neill told us from his streptokinase. There's really huge heterogeneity. Yeah. If you see the pictures, you will say, I'm not so super sure if something happens there. But what happens if you don't have an impeller is that after getting contrast, you will have lower oxygenation in the medulla of your kidney, which is somehow, you would say, well, this is not very much. But even under control conditions, your kidney in the medulla area is very, very, very close to suffocating. So this is the area where you don't want to waste a single mole of oxygen, and there in control patients you get a drop, and this is virtually abolished. Of course, if you look at the single data, you'd say it reminds me of Bill O'Neill's streptokinase. If you do the pairwise statistics, at least you can see something, right? So I would like to conclude that our interim analysis, or the pilot trial, reveals less acute kidney injury, of course non-significant and expected non-significant, in a high proportion of patients with unchanged kidney function following contrast administration in the impeller group. Treatment groups are well matched for kidney function and risk of acute kidney injury. They display low abundance of severely reduced LV function, albeit profound but well-balanced comorbidities. Think of the comorbidity index and 50% warfarin. We had, I forget to mention, but I had it on the table, we had 0 complications in the impeller group so far. We had 1 complication in the control group, where we somehow had a problem with the angioceal that we could fix ourselves. But so this, at least for me, would conclude that I could say, yeah, I could try to scale, or I would dare to scale the trial up, right? We did not detect safety concerns, I told you, and impeller patients are protected from LVEDP rise during catheterization, despite trend for increased diastolic blood pressures, along with stabilized oxygenation of the very, very sensible part of the kidney in the medulla, verified by MRI. So I would conclude that Protect Kidney will prove nephroprotection by impeller and decipher potential pathomechanisms. Thank you very much.